A Shalom Akim, Shalom, Shalom, giving all praises, glory and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem Rakakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone for teaching us his truth, and salutations to the sincere Akim and Aquathim. Listen, may the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Brother Raquai. I'm back in here with another quick and Lord's will, as always, an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I just wanted to go through a quick article in regards to the protest that's occurring in the U.S. Right? It's called the No Kings protest. Right? So I kind of just wanted to read through. Just bear with me one second. This protest here. So I want to read it on theguardian.com, and it says no king protesters on their hopes for resistant movement against Trump. If we lose momentum, we lose the fight. And more and more time again, we're starting to see there's a strong distaste for the people who are ruling, in their respective countries, especially in Babylon the Great, also known as America. This has been happening with the so-called monarchy, King Charles. There is a strong distaste. This happened recently also, I believe, in Nepal not too long ago. So more and more time again, ever since the whole vid situation back in 2020, there's been more of a distaste for these people who are ruling and the oppressive measures that are being placed upon their respective kingdoms, their respective countries, I should say, right? So it says 14 protesters from LA to DC share their thoughts on the leaders shut down negotiations and Republican policy. So there is a strong protest against Donald Trump. And what's very interesting about this is the fact that it hasn't even been a year. It's just over about, let's just say, about over 6 months, and this is the feedback of what's occurring in America. There's been a strong distaste for the rulers that be. So we're living in a time where we're starting to see the brewing or the coming together, or we're living in a time of Second Ezra, the 15th chapter, where you see the different plagues. You're starting to see as it discusses sedition, and I want to get that later on, but I kind of just want to read the article first before I actually get into that. So this is as a matter of fact, let me start off with this scripture here, and then I'll get back to the article first. This is Proverbs chapter 29, verse 2. And it says, when the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. But when the wicked beareth rule, the people mourn. And people are mourning in this state right now because there's more and more protest. You start to see a lot of shutdowns of different companies, people going on strike because things are tough economically, and they're losing, what little precious hope, they have in their precious, society. Now, when we go into the customs of our culture, one of the things that is not implemented upon this kingdom is actually paying people their wages the same day. Now, that particular measure is another reason why Esau doesn't actually, he's somebody, as the scriptures describe, thou hatest instruction, and this is one of the things that you see why people are in a mourning, oppressive state, because economically, they're finding it a lot more difficult to get ahead, right, to achieve their I know, pay off their student loans, or and be able to buy a house. You're starting to see a lot more young people, they're not able to actually afford this so-called American lifestyle, right? So I want to go back to the article here. I didn't actually read it. Hold on, let me just pull it up again. Okay, this is on theguardian.com, and it says Saturday's No King protests brought millions to the streets across all 50 states in the latest demonstration against Donald Trump's administration amid the government shutdown. Many protesters are already strategizing what to do next. Some said continuing to protest would be a sign of a vibrant civil resistance against the administration's heavy-handed policies, which have challenged the legal constitutional norms in the U.S. It says they also discussed economic boycotts and strikes. Others were concerned it would take more Americans feeling a direct impact to catalyze change. It says, a quote, "I think we have to see the demise before it turn around, sadly. But we are here to make sure that doesn't happen." It says Eric Stone, his name, 35 years old, from Oklahoma, who attended the protest in D.C. Right, so I want to jump down here. Scrolling down. So you're starting to see a lot of people feeling a strong distaste, and this is why the scriptures say, Babylon, we would have healed Babylon, but she's not healed, so forsake her, because there is no prosperity, in this kingdom. And this is one of the things that's a hard pill for a lot of our people, to understand, because, when you go into the time, like, for example, like in Joshua, the different tribes received their different, they received the different portions of the land, right? And, and that different portions of the land was, going down from our pedigree, going back to our, our forefathers. Now, in this society now, amidst this whole government shutdown, you might have a job, and the job might be working 20, 30 years, and they retire with some, some chump change, right? You don't actually have something of substance to be able to pass on to your children. You don't have anything, like some piece of land, like natural. When I say that, I mean like natural resources. Like you actually have, like, for example, like a vineyard where you have sheep or cattle or something like that, where something of substance, that kind of substance. You don't have that in this society, and they say it proudly, and they tell you straight up, these elites, they're niggards, because they'll tell you straight up, you will own nothing and be happy, right? Let me get that, hold on. This is Sirach chapter 14, verse 3, and it says, riches are not comely for a niggard, and what should an envious man do with money? Right? This is the type of person, who rules over, the planet, who rules over these respective kingdoms, because they are the type of people, they disregard the ways of the Lord, and their mindset is all about money and consumerism. So everything, it's all about profit rather than actually having morals to be able to properly govern, right? And you go into our culture, we're not even supposed to have complete heathens ruling over us, because why? They don't keep in mind the law, statutes, and commandments and the ways of the Heavenly Father, right? Let's go to Isaiah. Isaiah, the 24th chapter. This is verse 4, and it says, the earth mourneth and fadeth away, the earth languisheth and fadeth away, the haughty people of the earth do languish. The earth is defiled by the inhabitants thereof, because they have transgressed the laws, changed the ordinance and broken the everlasting covenant. I'm reading this because if you actually, follow the ways of the Lord, you'll be able to manage and keep the society running, right? And what this is one of the reasons why. Let me read it here. Because this is one of the reasons a lot of these people are disgruntled, because and they're feeling the economic pressure from this administration, right? This is Deuteronomy 24 verse 15, and it says, "In his day thou shalt give him his hire, neither shall the sun go down upon it, for he is poor, and setteth his heart upon it, lest he cry against thee unto the Lord Yahweh, and it be sin unto thee," right? So you're supposed to be able to, pay the people, their portion of substance, because they need it to be able to survive. But this is what happens in this society. You get your paycheck, either weekly or bi-weekly, and then on top of that, when you get your check, your what's the word I'm looking for? There's taxes on it, and that was one of the principal reasons why Rome fell. Rome fell, because one of those reasons was because they kept placing a lot of heavy taxation upon the people. Okay, so hold on. Okay, so so most of this is pretty much you just have people giving their quotes and their 2 cents. I'll read one here. This is so this is another quote. I'm just going to read this here, and it says, "I have felt that the movement needed a face for a long time. Someone rally the troops who respect and admire, but who is that? I don't know." She suggested it might be possibly a figure like Barack Obama. "There is these groups that protest all coalescence, but I'm afraid it's too fragmented. There needs to be one movement. This is not a joke," she said, of Republicans' resistance to negotiate with Democrats and expiration of affordable care subsidies. And these people don't know that, this, it's two horns like a lamb. It's still the same. It doesn't really make a difference who you elect, right? It really doesn't make a difference, right? You still had this is how you know this is Rome all over again, because Rome had a very, very similar system. Back then you had the patricians, and then you had the plebeians, and the patricians were more like your upper echelon, and then your plebeians were like your regular common folk, your fishermen, your cobblers, your bakers, your stonemasons, right? It's the same. It doesn't make a difference, right? In these times, in Canada, for example, you have the liberals and the conservatives, and in America you have your your Republicans and your Democrats. It's still part of the same system. It doesn't make a difference, who you decide to put forth in power, right? And it really does. And honestly, in truth, and back into the point I mentioned earlier, it doesn't make a difference, because none of them actually keep in mind the ways of Yahweh Bashim Yahushai, right? These people are not righteous rulers. The scriptures say an unwise king destroyeth his people, right? Because you're not actually taking care of the citizens. Okay, so moving on. Okay, let's see. So pretty much it's really just giving you an outline of different people from different walks of life, and they're just basically disgruntled, right? Actually, let me get this precept here. Let's go back to Proverbs. This is Proverbs chapter 25, verse 19, and it says, confidence in a faithful man in a time of trouble is like a broken tooth and a foot out of joint, right? So you can imagine if you have a broken tooth or a foot out of joint, it doesn't actually perform its usage properly. It's basically rendered useless. It's not able, it is not able to perform what it's able to do. And this is the type of feedback that you're receiving from somebody who's in power at this moment. And this is why the scriptures talk about come out of her, my people, right? Because there is no there's nothing here. Let's just put it like that. It's nothing here. It's just, you're taxed. You're troubled. There's no rest. And all that's part of the curses, man. Because in this society, you Israelites need to understand that America's wine is very, very strong and addictive, right? But it's not, you don't have any substance in this society. You don't have anything, you're not able to perform your sovereignty. Your sovereignty is stripped away in this society, right? I guess I'll end off with this one here, right? Because as I was going through the article, I realized it's mostly like people putting their 2 cents in, and they're pretty much just disgruntled about the whole. Okay, I'll read this one here. This one is a Jake. His name is Joshua Wilson, right? So it says, I work a lot with the government officials at my job as clients. It says, with the shutdown happening, I've been getting less work. Recently, my boss politely told me, hey, if you want to come to work, I can just stay home on certain days because of it. I do think Democrats are doing the right thing, but granted, it does affect me and affect me in a big way. I'm willing to risk my paycheck for doing what is right, right? So anyways, okay, let me get the prophecy in regards to the no kings. Actually, I forgot to get that. This is 2nd Ezra 15, verse 16, and it says, for there shall be sedition among men, and they and invading one another, and they shall not regard their kings nor princes and the course of their actions that shall stand in their power, right? So this is the sentiment that's brewing, because people are very disgruntled by the powers that be. And keep this in mind, it hasn't been a year. So imagine what happens in a year. Imagine what happens in a year and a half. It becomes, and when people start realizing that they're being, bamboozled, there's more and more people, they start to lose it, right? So this is why it's important for you Israelites to come back to the Lord, so you can seek righteousness and seek meekness, that you may be covered in the Lord's wrath, right? So I guess I'll end off with this one here in Hebrews. One second. This is Hebrews chapter 13, verse 14, and it says, for we have no continuing city, but we seek one to come, right? So that's pretty straightforward. We seek for a society that's properly, governed in righteousness. We're seeking for a society that is actually, we're able to actually have our sovereignty, because you don't have any sovereignty, you don't have any substance or something to call your own, in this society. You basically just have a bunch of crumbs on the master's table, right? So, I'll leave the lesson there, but Lord's will is always that this lesson was edifying, and just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem Rakakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone for teaching us his truth. Till next time, I say Shalom. Shabbat Shalom.